of the day. But if anyone has any more questions, if Bree's sticking around, maybe we can keep having conversation in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and move on to our next session. So Cory or Susannah, whoever is sharing their slides, if you want to go ahead and start. So our next presentation, we have Cory Nimer from Brigham Young University and Susannah Broyles from Texas State University presenting Found in Translation, an update on the Multilingual Description Task Force from the Usability Sub-team. This session will review the results of a community survey on multilingual description and the development of use cases based on these results. This initial work, undertaken by the Usability Sub-team with the assistance of an advisory group of community volunteers, seeks to identify and document staff and public user needs. The resulting use cases will serve as the basis for a specification for future development work. This session will present the survey results and use case drafting process to solicit community feedback. Cory and Susannah, over to you.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I apologize. It is allergy season in Texas, so my voice is going in and out. So my apologies. So I'm going to do the high-level overview of the results of the community survey. But first, some background. And if we can go to the next slide, Cory. Okay, so due to multiple GR tickets over the years requesting multilingual description functionality, ArchivesSpace has asked for community developed specification for multilingual description to guide development work. This was made a priority. This was made a priority by the programs team and was included for the winter 2024 development in the May 2023 roadmap. And in that, and because of that, it was part of the usability sub-team work plan of this year. So that was put on our work plan. And for the first few months of the last few months of 2023, we did our due diligence, did lots of research, gathered resources to kind of get the lay of the land. And once we did that, we created a survey to gauge the community interest and potential uses for this. So we sent out the survey via the ArchivesSpace listserv and Google group, various SAA listservs, and the ICA listserv in November 2023. And we received 84 responses. Next slide. And so onto the data. Like I said, this is going to be a very overarching view of the results. And as always, if you're curious to see any of the raw data or other segments, please let us know and we can get that to y'all. And so you can see the overwhelming institution type is academic archives, with 50 respondents being part of that, which is 60%. After that, special collections, museum archives on down, and each of those really brought their own interpretation to the survey. And next slide. And so also I wanted to show that while the respondents typically came from the US, there was a lot of engagement from the Netherlands, the UK, Belgium, Canada, China, and Australia. So breaking things down further, next slide, please. You can see from the US repository types, again, overarchingly from academic archives and special collections, and a few more business and corporate archives. And if we go to the international institutions, the same kind of breakdown. So this is a very heavily influenced by academic archives. And next slide. And another really interesting takeaway was the average staff size of repositories, with a lot of repositories only having 1 to 5 staff members, and the next one being more than 20, which is a very big jump. So again, you will see this in the free text responses that I'm going to show off later. Next slide. So this is really intriguing to see which record types that people would like to be able to include multilingual descriptions for. Again, most of them were resource records, then repository, and then digital objects and subjects, about the same. And that just really shows where people really are seeking this. Next slide. And this is just how important is multilingual description for your institution. And you can see that there was a lot of interest and a lot of importance in this. Next slide. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, the free text answers, I just picked a few to really highlight the main topics that came up. And as you can see in the first one, there's a lot of institutions that collect things in multiple languages. And the overarching theme in this was making these materials more available to those who primarily only speak those languages, and really trying to link the material to the people. And again, the next quote, that said it much more articulately than I just did. It would allow us to better connect certain collections to communities whose those collection descriptions matter most. And the last one brings in some more technical aspects that Cory is going to really show how we try to integrate into the use cases. And next slide. Some of the challenges are not unique in this. A lot of it goes to staffing and just not having the staffing available to create multilingual description. And really, that just was a major focus with a major theme in the challenges, is just not having the staff to do this. So a lot of people were very intrigued about having ArchivesSpace being the leader of this. And next slide. And that kind of goes into this. How likely is your institution to use multilingual description if it was added? I mean, I feel like that really says a lot, that people are really seeking this. And this goes over to the use cases. So Cory, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Susannah. Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about the use cases and the work that came out of that survey from last year. After we finished gathering that data, as part of the survey process, we allowed individuals to indicate whether they'd be interested in serving on a task force to build a set of use cases based on the data. And we were lucky to have a great group. I'm not going to list all the names here, but I'll just say that it included representatives from academic and government archives from both the United States and Europe, as well as members of the Usability Sub-team. Our first step in that process then was to review the community feedback from the survey, and then to go through and identify what the individual use cases would be. And for those that might not be familiar with use cases, our goal with writing this documentation was just to sort of write down what it was, what the desired functionality was, and usability that people were looking for, so that we could build a specification on top of that. The documented use cases that we were putting together aimed at describing how users would interact with the system, including the steps that they would take to complete tasks. And then we also tried to include alternative workflows just to document if there was a preferred workflow, what were our other options in implementing that functionality. Generally, use cases don't include details about display or mock-ups of what that would look like necessarily. They're mostly meant just to guide discussion within the community about what it is that we're looking for. So after reviewing the comments, we started to draft these use cases based on modules first. So looking at the resource records or other pieces of ArchivesSpace to see how that would fit in before moving on to cross-module functionalities like exports. And so for each of these areas, we identified the users that would be needing this functionality, looking at existing conditions that were necessary to perform the tasks, and then documenting the preferred or alternative workflows for each of those use cases. Again, normally we wouldn't have done mock-ups, but for the sake of our discussion today, I have created some mock-ups of what this description might look like that we'll come to in just a second. So in terms of the use cases, we ended up with 13 different use cases, including all of the modules available in the public user interface, except for accessions. And Susannah showed that slide about user interest in the different modules. Accessions was listed as having only 16% of institutions using the PUI to display that information. And so we ended up leaving it out of our use case list for right now. Other functional areas you can see here included record import and export and API access to records within the system. So let's look at what these use cases format looked like. For each of the use cases, we used a simplified format, again, including impacted users, preconditions necessary for the functionality, and some preferred and alternative workflows. So this is use case number 1 for the public user interface, and it focused on how external users would access multilingual content recorded in the application. So in the preferred workflow, according to, again, our community feedback and the input of our task force, users would be able to select their preferred language from a context-specific dropdown from anywhere in the site. The workflow also establishes the need for selecting a default language for a repository, and it also provides an option for parallel display of multilingual content for comparison's sake, as in some cases, the content might vary slightly between different languages. We also included an alternative workflow or two with some, again, other options that had been presented in our discussions, which we're hoping to get additional feedback from the community on. In terms of what this might look like, again, in this mock-up of what this might look like in the PUI, at a basic level, you'd see that language selection drop-down at the top right, as well as the C translation note expansion link after the scope and content, sort of toward the bottom of this screenshot. And then using the drop-down to select another language, and again, assuming that that alternative entry was available in that language, it would then display the content in the selected language. Looking quickly at a couple more use cases. Use case 2 focused on staff data entry and editing for the resource records. And so here the preferred workflow called for the inclusion of language and script drop-down boxes for each field, as well as the possibility of recording this information in the RDE view. In practice, this would mean entering notes and other entries in different languages in parallel in the application. For example, you might record a scope and content note in English and then a separate scope and content note in Spanish within the same record. Looking at a mock-up of that again, this again would mean adding a language and script dropdown for each note, note type, as well as other fields, and making those repeatable. One of those that came up right away was the title field, which right now is not repeatable. And so being able to record it in a multilingual parallel fashion didn't really fit with the current model. And so in use case 4, we included information about making that repeatable. But in our discussion, we've also talked about the need for having transcribed titles perhaps not be replaced with a language switch in the interface, even if translated titles were available. For device titles, that would probably not be the same issue though, and might want to be switched out according to language. And so looking at the mock-up for this, we can see the primary changes would be changing this to a drop-down, or including a drop-down for title type, and providing additional fields for transcribed titles with a language and script drop-down as part of that sub-record entry. In some areas of the application, supporting parallel multiple entries required greater adjustments, as seen in use case 6. In this case, the documents also called for implementing some additional functionality from other submitted tickets that weren't specifically multilingual, such as selecting an authorized term and a display term from ANW 1145, or linking related terms from ANW 361. And so these features can be seen in the mockups here with a selector button for authorized terms and display name, or maybe it should have been display term, as well as the language and script dropdowns in the term entry. Then lower in that same subject record, a repeatable scope and scope note, not scope and content note, scope note for the subject with its language and script dropdowns, and the related information section allowing linking to broader, narrower, related or equivalent terms. So we really appreciate the work of the Multilingual Description Task Force members, as well as the community in sending in comments, leading to the creation of these use cases. But before we move forward from the use case stage to developing a specification, we do want to make sure that there aren't additional use cases or other issues that need to be considered. So for that reason, we'd like to invite the community to read through the use case documentation and submit comments. We'll review all of those comments once they're received, and we'll create a revised version of the use case document that can be used for establishing requirements and then moving on to building that full specification. Once this has been completed, all of these documents will also be circulated and updated before being added to ANW 957, which is the core ticket in JIRA related to multilingual description. We'll also send out this information by email to the community, but those links will be available here in the slides. So at this point, I think we're open to any questions that you might have at this phase, either about the process or about the details of the use cases. But if you don't have questions today, again, we'd invite everyone to submit comments as part of that online form. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Cory. Thanks, Susannah. Yeah, this was great. Very interesting. Let me look in the Q&A before I start asking my own question. Kevin says, comment, not question. The use cases look great. I look forward to seeing the spec. Yeah, definitely agree. I did have a question about next steps and timeline. If you, is there a particular date by which you want people to submit comment on the form?
So our overall goal is to have the specification in place before the end of the term, which is a very aggressive timeline.
Yeah.
In terms of comments, I'll include that in the call that goes out in the email, but the last time for the survey we tried to give everyone a month. We'll probably aim for something along those lines, and so having the survey close toward the end of April before moving forward.
Gotcha. Awesome. Writing that down. All right, some questions in the chat. Since we did run late, we're going to take 5 minutes for to do Q&A now because we do have some questions. That will push our break back, but we'll still get the full 10-minute break. So just so you know, I know we're running over time, but we're still going to do the full break. Question from Brad. Did you address non-Latin scripts in this project, in particular those that read right to left like Arabic?
So the use case does not specifically call that out, although it was part of our discussion. I think it does make sense to make sure that that's clear in the specification and should probably be documented in the use case as well. But it was an issue in our discussions, and it is something that hopefully can be addressed.
Thanks. Yeah. Kevin asks, will the spec include metadata export maps for EAD?
So the spec should include export mappings, but I don't think that those should be finalized just on their own. I don't remember the name of the team, but the metadata
Standards sub-team.
Metadata standards sub-team
Yeah.
should definitely have a chance to review those and make sure they're lining up with their objectives before that gets finalized.
Yeah, very true. Cory asks, when asking using what parts of ArchivesSpace they want to add multilingual functionality, was there a breakdown between resources versus archival objects? Meaning, are we considering adding multilingual functionality to archival objects specifically as well? They share a lot of fields with resources.
Yes. So the documentation, I think it should include resource records, archival objects, digital object records, and digital object component records in those sections. But it does include a variety of other portions of the application, including repository records and subject records. So we tried to include it wherever it made sense. Again, there were maybe a couple of reasons for not including it in accessions. The biggest one being that most institutions were not making that information available in the PUI according to the survey. But also just the structure of the accession records didn't lend itself to making that multilingual modification without major revisions to how that looks and works.
Thanks. All right. Before I read the next two questions, I just want to clarify that the functionality we're talking about is enabling the ability to provide multilingual description, not performing the actual translations themselves. So the next question was existing built-in translation capability of the various browsers considered as part of the use case discussions?
So in terms of the use cases, that was not part of our discussion, but I think Susannah made it clear that especially for smaller institutions, there was that was an issue that came up. It was something that people were interested in. But we didn't look at how to enable that or maybe streamline that. I believe that that's still available either through a browser plugin or running a URL through a service like Google Translate. But it wasn't an area that we looked at.
Right. Thanks. We have 1 more minute, so I'm going to ask one more question, but there are multiple questions in the Q&A. So maybe if either Cory or Susannah, if you have a second, if you could type an answer to these. But the last question I'm going to read, any thoughts for using generative AI transliteration services rather than manual data entry?
I don't have any thoughts. I don't know, Susannah, if you have any ideas there. I mean, we were looking at this as manual data entry. There are translation services that might be available.
I think that would be up to the institution itself rather than an ArchivesSpace thing.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, this is specifically about enabling the functionality, not about performing the translation or how you perform the translation. So I think it's an interesting question. I think both of those questions are really interesting and maybe great questions for the listserv. And will probably questions like that will begin to be generated on the listserv when this functionality moves farther along in the process for sure. But not your questions to answer right now, Cory and Susannah, that's for sure. We are at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and end. But yeah, thank you so much to Cory and Susannah both for your update on this. This has been really interesting to watch, and I've just got to say the 84 responses on the survey was awesome. This is really great work. So we're going to go ahead and move into break now, though. And if you've been following along in the chat, Confluence has been down, so you haven't been able to look at the agenda. But thank goodness it came back at the perfect moment. We're going to go ahead and move to break. We're going to take a 10-minute break now. We're going to come back at 10 minutes after the hour. You don't have to be listening to me right now. You can assume that we're already moved into break. But we're going to come back